Well, you know what other album came out the same year as this album? Rage Against the Machine.
It did.
two different albums. And it's their debut self-titled album. And in the opening montage, you heard Killing in the Name. And now you're going to hear Know Your Enemy.
Debut album Rage Against the Machine comes in at number 27 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums. Number 2 in 1992. Second only to...
In 1992?
Pixies?
No.
10?
No, Automatic
Me
for the
Too.
People. We covered it last week.
Okay.
Overall, ranked overall at number 125. It's their highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. It's also the only album that we're covering this week that was in Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 221. And Rage Against the Machine is ranked as the number 149 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Okay, well, this album came out November 3rd, 1992. They were formed in LA in 1991, and the four members are Zach De La Rocha on vocals, Tom Morello on guitars, Tim Comerford on bass and backing vocals, and Brad Wilk on drums and percussion. They met when Tom Morello's band Lockup broke up, and he was looking to start a new band, and his former drummer of Lockup, John Knox, suggested that De La Rocha and Comerford play with him. Then Morello contacted Brad Wilk, who had unsuccessfully auditioned for Lockup and also for the band that later became Pearl Jam. So I guess he's lucky he got in this band. The band is named after a song that De La Rocha had written for his hardcore punk band Inside Out. They only have 4 albums from this one to 2000, and this is the debut. Genres include rap metal, rap rock, alternative metal, hard rock, new metal, heavy metal, every combination of metal and rock that you can think of. It's funk metal.
All the metal. all the metals.
Influences include every person that we've covered on this show. Led Zeppelin, Bob Dylan, U2, Chili Peppers, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Police, Devo, Public Enemy, Beastie Boys, Clash, Minor Threat, Bad Brains, Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, Sex Pistols, Fugazi, Bad Religion, and leftist political ideology. That's another key component to their sound. I would say many bands are similar to them or were influenced by them, followed by a lot of new metal bands that we all know. Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, Linkin Park, System of a Down, Korn, Papa Roach. The list goes on and on. The highest rated single of theirs is Guerrilla Radio, which reached 69 on the Hot 100 in 1999. And both their next 2 albums, Evil Empire and Battle of Los Angeles, debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. We will also be covering those 2 albums on the show. Some fun facts. I tried to keep it related to this kind of early period and this album. Initial album sales were slow until they started playing Killing in the Name on the radio. And then, which is interesting, what did they just cut out the last entire part of that? I don't remember, but their appearance at Lollapalooza in the summer of '93 really boosted their profile and sales. From thousands into hundreds of thousands of copies sold. The album artwork is a cropped photo of the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Quang Duc, who was self-immolated, and so that's a memorable, provocative cover. The album date release coincided with the 1992 presidential election between Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush. That's funny. The statement in the album says no samples, keyboards, or synthesizers were used in the making of this record. And they also name check activists in the liner notes as well as Ian and Alec Mackay from Minor Threat and why am I blanking on there? Fugazi. Sorry. And
they cover Minor Threat on that cover, that Renegades album.
Renegades,
well,
yeah.
In Your Eyes, yeah.
Yep. I thought this was interesting. I'll save that fact for later on. Anyway, there's some interesting later on stuff in the 2000s that I'll go over. So that's it. It's a short and sweet bio. Let's let the music speak for itself. I think we're all familiar with this album, probably. And so, John, what about Rage this time that you picked up on?
Well, I think the thing that stands out to me about Rage isn't necessarily stuff I didn't know, but stuff that's hammered home, which is I think over time, Rage has gotten this this idea as they are a hip hop and metal band, which there's elements of that, don't get me wrong. Listening to this album, and I knew this always, so it wasn't like a revelation stuff. At its core, especially this era of Rage, they're like a hardcore band.
Yep.
They're just a hardcore band that puts in elements of hip hop, largely through Zach De La Rocha, right? Like it's kind of coming with that sensibility. Not that the other members I don't think were hip hop fluent, because they certainly were, but this is as close to being a hardcore album as you could get without being fully hardcore album. And as such, it's an evolution of hardcore that I don't think that people process them as like a hardcore band. I think they're only processed as punk because of the left-wing messaging, but at this point in time, I think they share a lot more in common with a punk band that can play heavy like a metal band than they are like the hip-hop oriented band. I think really that's the big thing I take away a little bit. The other thing is, and this one did come like about a little bit, how much there isn't anything we've covered that sounds like Rage Against the Machine. And because so many bands later try to sound like this, I think you almost lose sight a little bit of like just how much of a pure shot of like adrenaline this album is.
It is, yeah.
And it is like an incredibly adrenaline producing album, and in a different way than just heavy metal is or hip hop is. It's its own sort of alchemy that so many people try to do afterwards, to lesser effects, in my opinion. These guys are sort of, in some ways, there's other groups like Faith No More and some of what the Chili Peppers are doing that trod some ground, but none of them are this intense. The only things we've done that are this intense are hardcore and some of like the death metal that we haven't really covered. You know, this is an intensity layer of around like Black Flag and Slayer level intensity, I'd say, would be probably the only two groups I could think of we've covered that have this level of intensity. It also kind of, you can understand while also just laughing hysterically at like how people who wouldn't at all understand the political part of it could somehow just completely turn off that. Right. I mean, we hear Matt all the time say he turns off the lyric. I'm sure Matt didn't turn off the lyrics here, but like how he says he could turn it off. But it's just the classic story, of course, is like when Paul Ryan's like, this is my like workout stuff. It's so great for that. And Rage was like appalled by the whole idea. Yeah. And of course, anyone who even has a cursory knowledge of them just has to laugh and go, how the fuck can you possibly say that? Like the lack of, but like, it's just, you could see how it could happen though, because you put this on, and one of the listens I did on this, I just happened to do when I was beginning to start, working out. And it's like fucking tremendous workout music, but it's more than that too. It's just, but it's just Zach De La Rocha's ability to just like blood curdling scream and the repetition, which the repetition works for them because it adds to the intensity. And once again, that's something very similar to hardcore, right? There's not a lot of words or a lot going on here. They're just giving it to you straight ahead. There's a directness just like Minor Threat or Fugazi has, right? That's just right there. You don't have to guess what their politics are. Their politics are going to be strongly left-wing, marginalized. I think Freedom's about Leonard Peltier, the Native American activist. And there's... the song's about Columbus, very Howard Zinn, like and different stuff. And obviously, one of the cool things about Rage Against the Machine is they never like ran away from it. Like they still are left. Like they didn't become kind of like how people with the Dead Kennedys, they like kind of sold out a little bit while keeping some of it, and then other people, they were part of the movement till they weren't. They have always lived in it.
Yeah, they're like Fugazi in that way, right?
Yes,
they really lived there.
So once again, the ties are much stronger to that end of things. And I just always think it's funny, like the Paul Ryan thing comes to mind, but I always thought it was funny that SNL somehow thought it was a good idea to book them the same night they booked Steve Forbes and didn't think something was going to happen. Just like there's all these things where like Rage Against the Machine gets put in these things. It's like, well, of course that's what Rage Against the Machine did. There's no other way this would have ended besides that. And that's why they always toured with hip hop, because there's a level of anarchy you were allowed to have in like that world that like fit perfectly. So I mean, yeah, this is a highly influential album. It's not hard to figure out why this band became huge. Once again, listening to them in the context of where they fall does give a level of understanding to just like, wow, there is not a lot that did this, and there's a lot later that does. And until I listened to it at its time, I don't think I quite realized. I do, only because I remember listening to this album, and I remember, true story, I somehow was able to go to a Rage Against the Machine concert at the ripe old age of just turned 13.
Wow.
So when they were,
That's awesome.
We'll hold off on that story because I don't know if the statute of limitations of how that happened were there, but we'll just say I saw them in Philadelphia at a club I never should have been in. And it was fucking great.
So just this album had come out?
Yes.
Okay.
And still, like, they were sort of like, I mean, this album didn't break Rage huge. It was the next one, Evil Empire, that did. Like, this allowed them to go to like Lollapalooza, where they got a following, and they started. And I remember seeing the Freedom video on.
That got good
MTV,
rotation.
but they're not going to play like "Killing in the Name of" on MTV because you're just going to play a song at that time. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. And even Bomb Track, right? Another big hit. That was like a slow grower. It wasn't really in, and it was more the hip hop world that brought that out. That's the most hip hop song I think of all of them. But yeah, Freedom I remember seeing on there, but it was kind of like, whoa, this is something, but it wasn't played like all the time. So yeah, when I saw them live, it's just like, holy shit. I mean, if you look at clips of them live in 92 and 93, they're shockingly full formed. Like at that time, it's kind of amazing to always see a band like we looked at those clips of Nirvana, right? They were kind of like that too. It's like, wow, they figured it out real quick. So yeah, I'd be easy thumbs up here. Like deep, hugely influential album. I've listened to this album a bajillion times. I can go into the nuts and bolts of the songs, but I don't want to over talk. So I guess it would be Josh, right?
No,
or Matt. Sorry.
Well, I did not listen to this album a bajillion times. I didn't know it that well. I knew some of the songs.
Oh, wow.
I knew Freedom. I knew Killing. Yeah, and I owned Evil Empire and I owned Battle for Los Angeles. I never owned this record. So it's just one of those things that like it's also probably I think I enjoyed this more than the other two. It's similar to like other bands that I've gotten like the debut album is supposed to be the best one, and then like. I followed afterwards and never really got down with that first one. So, but anyway, this, the hardcore thing definitely came to my mind this time. I never really thought of it before, but like listening to it this week, I was like, yeah, this is definitely, in that vein. And I've historically talked about, certain bands that we've covered, particularly in like a hardcore genre, or in some of the punk stuff that we've covered, that there's just this anger, right? And I know that certainly, people that are into this type of music go into shows. It's like they got to get that anger out, that the mosh pit, like the, just that energy. And I've never, described myself or thought of myself as someone that was an angry person, or that I have this, inner rage that I need to let loose out, let out at a show or whatever. And I still feel that that's very much true. This album, however, if there's going to be some of that coming out, it's going to be from something like this, because this does get me amped like none other. Like this is, and I think a big reason for that, one of my biggest issues with hardcore when I've heard it, it's harsh, right? There's just there's not really a melody there, or the vocals are such that like they're so, maybe it's a guttural thing and it's just like too much screaming or whatever, and it's just off-putting. But this is layered with amazing riffs. Like this is a riff-heavy album, both from the Morello's guitar and Comerford's bass, that's just like infectious. It's just like it grabs you right away with Bomb Track. Killing in the Name is just, oh my god, the energy, like the way that it builds and then releases, it's fantastic. It's like textbook, is songwriting to build to this release of energy, right? That they just do so well.
Well, and true
there's
story, Matt. When we
Yeah.
would go, my friends and I would go to the beach, right? And we would be ready to go out for the night. We would always put on this album for a couple things and just have your beer before you go out. You know what I mean? And just fucking scream at
Yes.
the top to set the tone. So
Yeah, it's just it's very much. I can get to that point with an album like this, right?
Yeah.
And yes, there is that hip hop element in here. There's a metal element. Like what is it? Know Your Enemy has a guitar riff on there. I'm like, that's like, that is like a speed metal. That's like a Metallica type riff. And you're like, right? And it's just the riffs are great. Like these are fantastic riffs. And Zach
it
Del
sounds like
Roca's-
Judas Priest is who that.
Yeah,
riff
that's
sounds like,
okay.
for sure.
Yes. And Zach Del Roca does have like this guy is letting it all out, but it's tempered with, he's not doing it all the time, and it's just, I don't know how else to describe it. It's a scream that I can get down to that is not off-putting, and it fits so well with the music that's being played behind it. Also, totally like the Iris Dement album that we just covered. There was a song on here that immediately I knew what it was from, and that's "Wake Up." It's the closing song from The Matrix.
Yeah.
And I was like, right, I knew that song, but I forgot that I knew that song, so it kind of came back here and stuff. So great opening. That another great guitar riff opening there. Yeah, just really solid. Like it's a very easy thing for me to get into. And yes, this is a singular band. I do remember that they put that in the liner notes, that all the instruments on here are just the guitar, bass, drums, and vocals. And they're mostly putting that in there because of what Morello is doing with the guitar, because he gets his guitar to sound like a harmonica or like a synthesizer or just anything but a guitar, right? And you're like, how is that? There's a couple of points in here where I'm like, I've heard that sound before, but it's usually from a synth or something like that, right? And he has found a way to manipulate the guitar or the amp, whatever he's playing it with, that he's kind of creating it as his own sound. That's very distinctly Tom Morello. It's like how any other guitar, like the Edge, right? The Edge is known for. Probably a difference there is probably Morello's a little bit more of a virtuoso guitar player, but the Edge is just about effects and sonic kind of thing and making his own sound. And Morello is certainly that. Like he does something that nobody else has really that I've ever really heard do before. So you've got that. But then the rhythm section behind it's great too, and it just comes together as this like really. Yeah, there's rage, right? That the name is very apropos, and so many. But the riffs, I think, is what really stands out as being something that, okay, you take a riff like that's that catchy, you put that much energy behind it, you put the vocals and the passion of a Zach De La Roca, the unique stylings of a guitar player like Tom Morello, and as I'm driving, I'm screaming along too. Like I let something out while I was like, wow, I could never do that, So you can see this laying the groundwork for so much that came after it, for better or for worse. Probably it's like similar to we talked about this, I think, with Alice in Chains, right? That's like there was some good that came out of that, but there was a lot of bad. But that's okay, because you still have at the ground floor you have something like this. Right. Which is just very singular, right, and unique, and big thumbs up.
Yeah, Preaching to the Choir, Rage is probably one of my favorite bands of the 90s, and I've listened to this album dozens of times, and it never gets old. I love De La Roca's voice, like you guys said. It's like the power and the rage of his politics, and the situation of society comes through in his singing. I love Tom Morello's guitar. I pick every song. His guitar playing sounds different every time, and there's always something different to pick up when I listen to him play. I picked up some of I guess one of the main takeaways I have with Rage is like, I can't think of another band that's so blatantly political that's also extremely popular. We've talked about some hardcore bands that have politics in them and stuff, but that does not exist anymore. And people would be, i.e. Republicans would be having a field day if there was a band like this that was like so leftist leaning or just kind of anti-authority, anti-government type of thing.
Anarchists.
Well, this type of left doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
It's been so thoroughly chased out of the mainstream. You know what I mean? That you just don't really, as much as you hear about this, it's like Antifa, which people can't even figure out if it's actually a real thing. You know what I mean? Or just a fake boogeyman. So yeah.
Yeah, but so like pro-union, pro-worker, it would be a whole other discussion talking about like kind of the political nature of Rage. But I feel like the lyrics, and they're kind of like simplistic in a way, there's not a lot of words. There's only like 8 lines in Killing in the Name that are like repeated.
Yes, he repeats a lot. You're right.
In different kind of, formations, but still it's effective. And I feel like,
well, it works because the whole idea is that these killings of police killings, which of course was not a thing many people were talking about besides like Ice-T, right? And like hip hop artists, right? That the idea is that they just keep happening, right? So the repetition works. Yeah,
but that structure is used throughout the album in different songs and in later albums, and I think it's an effective way to get your message across if you can sing along. I think, like you said, Matt, I think it comes through, like it starts to permeate in your head when you can like sing along to the lyrics in such a simplistic way.
It takes over you, like
not
it's
either.
Like takes over you. It's like all of a sudden it's like I'm being like I can't help myself but just like get engaged with this music in a way that like very few other artists or songs can. It's crazy.
And some other interesting things, I picked up kind of the funk nature and like Take the Power Back. I guess Public Enemy would be kind of a close proximity to the political message, and that song reminded me of them as well. And just like there's a little guitar interlude in Settle for Nothing that's really interesting that I noticed this time. Know Your Enemy has the break where they're like background singers are saying stuff, and Maynard James Keenan's on that. He's in the backing vocals on that. I thought that was interesting of Tool and other bands, and just just the power, the energy. I've always responded to that. It just rises above everything else, all other bands. We said that other bands have mimicked or imitated them, not on the political level, maybe just in the sound, and they're inferior as a result, in my opinion. I think they're a singular band. They did make the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last year, and this is an elite level album for me in the 90s. So thumbs up. All right.
I mean, there's not much else to say. I mean,
go listen to the album if you haven't.
Yeah, I think you're the biggest fan of Rage Against the Machine of all of us, Josh. But I think we're all fond of the band, and we're going to be covering the next 2.
Yep, Evil Empire and Battle of Los Angeles. Yep.
That's crazy. They only have 4, but it's another of those bands that did so much with so little.
So they really only have 3.
Yeah, right. Yep. But another band that did, or artist that did so much with in such a short period of time or such a little output.
Yep. Definitely.
Absolutely.